Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I rank the worst card designs of the 1990-91 SkyBox card set. The reason I wanted to do this was I had originally planned to avoid it, but somebody asked me what the best card design in 1990-91 SkyBox was, and trying to isolate one caused me to decide that, forget it, I've got to go ahead and do a ranking of these cards. And the reason for doing a ranking of these cards is that they came up with a great concept, which was get rid of the card background and put something behind. It wasn't the first time this had been done. It had been done in main sets in the past, but in this case, they wanted to have a really cool effect in the background, and that was what hadn't been done. And so the way that the effect works makes the cards, in most cases, it makes them really, really neat. But it doesn't always succeed. And so that's what I'm going to be looking at here is the cards where they tried and then they fell short. A separate video will be looking at the best examples of it. This is the worst examples. The cards that they either gave up designing or they just kind of figured, that'll be good enough. And these cards work well as fodder for anybody who's not into this concept. So anybody who's not sold on these SkyBox cards, the way that these cards are done, these are the cards they turn to complain about them. And with good reason. And even though I'm just doing a straight ranking, I do have to throw in kind of an honorable mention here, which is the Sam Bowie card, because it's actually not a bad card. It is a pretty good card. The only problem with this card is the fact that it's got this leg just appearing in the middle of the card. And I'm not the only person who's noticed this. It is weird. It's not something that you really notice necessarily, but it's a really dumb thing where any designer should have known better than to have that there. It's not like you can just airbrush it out. This is back before Photoshop. Even though these cards are technically Photoshopped, in terms of how we use the term Photoshop, this wasn't Photoshop. This was really high-end work that they were doing. And so you can't just go in and clean up the image to get rid of the leg. You're stuck with the leg. But you got a man's leg just kind of there in the front of the card and in the foreground too. So while it's not a bad card, I've got some notes. So as far as the cards that I really have no excuse for, I got to start off with Lasalle Thompson. And in the case of Lasalle Thompson, this again is a good card. It's just got a major problem. Now here, in one of the tricks of working with this, where you get rid of the whole card background and you have just the effect, is that you lose the context of the play, which is fine. Most of the time, if you're just focused in on the activity of the player, that's fine. And in this case, it has all the pieces it needs. In fact, I would say that the fact that they included the backboard really helps the card and makes this card stand out. It's a lot more fun than a lot of the other cards in the set, so I like it for that. And there's no confusion as to who is the focus of this card, because Lasalle is very clearly, he's basically interacting with the basketball. So great. And having another player opposite him, they could have taken away the Laker and just kind of centered him in the shot, and I think it would have been a lot better. But by shifting it over and then having another player, it creates a really good balance. The problem is, who's shooting this ball? It's very clear that Lasalle is trying to block the shot. Okay, great, no problem. But is the Laker throwing the ball up? Because if he is, he's either throwing it up flat-handed or it's some weird kind of movement. I don't know how this shot works. If it was somebody further out who was shooting the ball, that would make a lot more sense, and I would be fine with that, which begs the question, what in the world is the Laker doing? Because his interaction is weird. And so this is a case of a card where I just have no clue what's going on. I love the card until I start to look at the story, and then the story doesn't make sense. So just kind of weird. But again, it looks good. It's just it's got some major issues. Then we have Billy Thompson, and in the case of Billy Thompson, this is the ever-present question of the floating hoop. Sometimes the floating hoop looks cool. In this case, it almost does, but it really is frustrating. So when you get rid of the backboard and you have just the hoop, this adds the ability for a dynamism. But this card is perfectly centered, and so he's coming up and dunking on the hoop, or he's doing more of a layup. He's not really dunking. But the thing is that now his interaction is there at the hoop. It feels kind of like he's dunking, which means that there's got to be something securing the basket. And in other cards, you could feel like the basket is kind of secured off to the side. In this case, because everything's lined up and you're looking forward at him, so he's coming toward you, you feel like you're where the backboard is, even though there's no backboard. And so for me, it really enunciates the fact that this basketball hoop has to be attached to something. Even if it's thin air, it's got to be attached to it. And I get the feeling of it's being attached to, well, in this case, nothing. It's almost like he's holding the basketball hoop up. It's weird. So this is a great opportunity for something where the centering provides a lot of really cool effects, the way that he's dunking on the basketball, etc. All of this stuff works, except in the context, just in the context, it kind of gets ruined. So it's frustrating that happened. And I do like the basketball echo, the rings, kind of like in his dunking the basketball or getting the basketball into the hoop, that's causing a ripple effect. I like that. But it also kind of highlights that the basketball and the hoop are the key to this card. So it kind of enunciates the problem as I see it. Then we have Greg Kite. And in the case of Greg Kite, there are a couple of issues. First off, I'm looking at Series 1 cards here for these SkyBox cards. And in doing so, all of the Kings cards in the set have the baby blue, or I think it's called Robin's Egg blue, that they went with on these jerseys. I don't know why. Terrible blue or sucky blue is really a better term to go with. I liked the dark blue for these jerseys. I love the white jerseys that they had at this time. But these light blue jerseys, they've always looked terrible. But I do have to admit that in these SkyBox cards, it actually makes the blue look decent. So they do get half credit for that, but only half credit in terms of making the jerseys a little bit better. But I wish that they'd gone with the white jerseys. It would have been a lot better. So I got that issue, but that's not the problem with the card. The problem with the card is, what is he doing? Well, he's doing a layup, but he's actually doing a reverse layup, which if you have the context, you can feel the reverse layup. You understand what he's doing, but without the context, you have to believe that he's doing a reverse layup. It's Greg Kite. I mean, with that mustache, no, this guy does not do reverse layups. He is about as square as you can possibly get. So every time I look at it, it looks to me like a regular straight up layup where they just they put the basketball in, but they put it behind his hand. And then the hoop was put behind that. It looks like they added those elements and put them in the wrong order. So for me, every time I look at this card, it looks to me like a bad Photoshop job, which is sad because it's actually cool that you got him doing a reverse layup. It's just here you need the context to be able to accept it's a reverse layup, so that when you look at it, you do understand all the pieces of the card as opposed to it looking like there's something wrong. So, that's what I got to say for that. Then there's Michael Smith. And with Michael Smith, I'm a little bit too hard on this card because every single time I go through this gorgeous set, as I'm going through card after card after card, every time I hit this Michael Smith card, it bothers me. It really bothers me. It's actually a decent card. In terms of just the general card itself, I don't really have any complaints about it, except for the fact that there's no liveliness to it. This is a bland card. Admittedly, for a bland player. There are a couple of players on every team that are also rans. They happen to be on the roster. They're good enough to make it into the NBA, but they're only putting a couple of points up. So they're not really exciting. Guys like Jim Les and Jim Peterson and Michael Smith. And this card really kind of enunciates to me the fact that he is an also ran guy. Just another one of those white guys that they threw on the team that it felt like that they were doing at the time. And it comes down to the fact that all of these cards need to be carrying energy. You're really focusing in on the players and highlighting, you're emphasizing the player and the competition of his presence on the court. That's the whole point. And here he's just standing there with the basketball, which can be okay, but the swoosh behind is usually a very effective trick. In this case, it basically starts at the clipper and then it heads up through, basically past him and up around the corner, and he kind of blends into it. That's the problem. He becomes a part of the scenery, part of the background. Because he doesn't have any energy, he loses the fight in the card, and he becomes a part of the tapestry to the point where there's nothing exciting or engaging about him. So every time I go through the set, I hit this card, and this is the first time I go, oh yeah, some of these cards don't work. Some of these cards are disappointing. So for me, it's the overpowering blandness of this card that I think is just criminal. This is another case of, seriously, this is the best image you could find for him? Or more correctly, you couldn't go with a better background if you were going to go with this image? This is where we're at with it. So, okay, but it's still a major letdown. Then we have Wayne Cooper. And the problem for Wayne is that this is the ultimate sin of these cards, of the technology that they're doing with this card, because the idea of getting rid of the background and just focusing in on the player is great. It's wonderful. I love the idea. But you got to be, it's tricky to do this because this is not the first card set that they've done this with. So in order to really pull this off and to pull off this is happening on some Space Jam court up in space somewhere, that kind of an effect, you've got to be able to make sure that every single one of these images reads effectively. And that begins with your feet are landing on somewhere. Now, your feet can land on the black. That's okay, that there's just kind of space out there and the feet are landing on some unknown surface, unseen surface. That's okay. But where it becomes a problem is when the feet are very clearly landing on absolutely nothing. And with this card, that's the problem, is the fact that he's sitting up too high. So if they dropped him down a little bit further down, you could feel like the feet are basically at the bottom of the image. But because they're up, the whole star pattern behind, it continues down below and shows that it looks more like someone stuck a fat head on the wall and just had that, had a picture on the wall. That's what it looks like here. It looks like he's pasted on. I love the star pattern. That echo of the star is a great thing. And really, if you go from the mid basketball shoe up, this is a great card. Not one of the top cards, but this is a really, really, really solid card. If you do that, the moment you drop down though, and you have the star pattern go below the feet, you're wondering, okay, what in the world is going on with his feet? Because now he's literally floating in the air, which it looks weird. It looks dumb. And that's the thing. Don't center him. Drop him down so that we feel like he's actually standing on something. Speaking of which, then we have Jeff Martin. And with Jeff, it's the exact same thing, but in kind of like the opposite version. So in the case of Wayne, he was literally standing on the court. Jeff is very clearly not standing on the court, but here's where the problem is. He is coming down with a rebound, or he's jumped up in the air with the ball, or he's doing something. If you look at his feet are floating in space. They are actually angled down like he is in the air. And you can believe that he went up and he got a rebound and he's coming down with the ball. The problem is he's got the ball here and his head is over here. Whenever you go for a rebound, you look at the ball in order to get the ball. You don't look away, just reach up and grab the ball. And so the fact that his head is turned away means that he has gone up, grabbed the ball, and turned his head away, had enough time while he was in the air. Only Michael Jordan could do that, and even Michael could only do that in a Looney Tunes cartoon. There's not enough time to go through that whole motion while you're still in the air. Which begs the question, okay, so did he jump up into the air while he was looking away? Which begs the question, why are you jumping in the air while you're holding the ball like that? It's a mess. There are three components. There is the basketball, which is held in his arms in a very weird way. There is his head looking in the opposite direction, which would mean you would assume that he's scanning the court. And then there's his feet that are clearly not on the ground. So this card is frustrating to me because it looks to me like a Buffy the Vampire Slayer vampire coming down with a rebound and just kind of showing off. It reminds me so much of that scene. This Jeff Martin card, it really bugs me. Every time I look at it, that's all I can think of. And it's no bueno. And I can't see it any other way. So, there we go. Then we got Leonard Copeland. And the problem with Leonard Copeland is I can put this card pretty much anywhere on this list. The card itself isn't bad. It's pretty decent. But this is where you got to understand artistic design in some capacity. When you get rid of the background, you're focusing in on the player. So the player is everything. And you can easily have another player on the card to add some tension to it. It makes it work really cool. The problem here is that you have two players in the foreground and Leonard is in the background, which means now you have space. You actually have a three-dimensional space they're in, just, without a court. So you've already got that weird dynamic of all of these pieces that are not, there's something missing to it. The fact that you actually have the space doesn't work with the effect. But the bigger problem comes from the fact that when you look at the card, the first thing you see is Scott Brooks' jersey. He's facing away, but it's the brightest thing on there. And even Leonard Copeland, his presence on the card is kind of dark. Look at his jersey. His jersey is darker than Scott Brooks' jersey is. So the lighting is actually wrong for Leonard and it's right for Scott Brooks. So when you look at the card, the first thing you see is the player who's not the focus of the card. You see the action and he's out of focus, so that doesn't help. And then you got to hunt around on the card to figure out, okay, who's the focus of the card? Oh, it's that guy back there. Okay, so he's the focus. Even in the case of the Lasalle Thompson card, you knew exactly who the player was because 1, he was interacting with the basketball. 2, he was the big energetic portion of the card. 3, the backboard was an integral part. That's really what caught your eye and it pulled you right into him. And then you also have the team logo and then you have his jersey, which work together. In this case, Leonard is the last thing that you see on the card. It takes you a while to find him. And the fact that it has that depth that doesn't work with anything, as well as with him there, it's not a good success. But I gotta put the worst card design to me of this entire card set with Joe Berry Carroll. And in the case of this is really just dumb. It actually does exactly the same things I just talked with Leonard about. In the case here, he's got to be back close to the free throw line. He's a ways back. Because you got to understand, Joe Berry Carroll, he's not short. The dude's 7 feet tall. And yet here on this card, he looks like a miniature person trying to throw the ball way up into the hoop, or that the hoop's like 12 feet up in the air. It does not look at all right. The fact is, he's further back, and with no context, it doesn't make sense. It would have been a whole lot better if they had gotten rid of the basketball hoop, gotten rid of the basketball, and brought him in a lot closer. Because the card is a really well-designed card. This is a card that perfectly showcases everything that's great about this card set. The effect that they have on the back of the design, it has the elegance that this card set is so good at capturing, and it's really subtle, and it works well with him. In fact, he has some really interesting lighting on him to where there's some tension in the lighting that artistically looks good and works with the background. So if they had made him much bigger without any context, it'd have been an awkward pose, but it'd have been a good looking card. Definitely not one of the great looking cards, but certainly not on this list. Instead, you get this 7 foot tall midget who is heaving the ball up to this basket that is all out of focus or all out of context, and just a weird mess of a card. This is one of those cards that as I go through, it catches my eye, not grabs my eye, but it catches my eye and it just has me stop and go, wait, what am I looking at? And I gotta put together the pieces and figure out what this is. So these are the cards that I think are the biggest failures of the 1990-91 SkyBox card set. There are some really big failures. I think that this is about as bad as it gets. But boy, when they got him right, they got it so magnificently right. That's another video. This is this one, and it's an interesting exploration of how to do design work. So if you're not familiar with how artistic design works, how graphic design works, these are some really good things to understand. Like if you wanted to make your own cards, these are some ideas to kind of keep in mind. And that's part of the fun of doing this. It's also fun to do this just to be able to sit around with my cards and flip through all the cards and explore them. And maybe that's something that you want to do, sit down and go through and try to figure out what cards should have been on the list, knock yourself out. I'm really curious to hear what you got to say. Other than that, as always, check out my other videos if you haven't gotten a chance. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. And yeah, thank you very much for watching.